Welcome back to Neil Ratnow Rock Doc's Reading Room, where I'm serializing my book, Rock Doc. I'm an office-based anesthesiologist, and I'm working with a plastic surgeon, and he's telling his friends, and I'm developing a big practice, and things are working out pretty well. And so let's see where they go from that. Okay. Now, doctors, and especially cosmetic surgeons, love to brag, and Somers was no different. By the beginning of August, I was overwhelmed with requests to give anesthesia in other offices. Scheduling was the problem. Even with juggling, I could only cover 3 or 4 offices. And actually, the problem was most doctors, plastic surgeons, whatever, like to operate at 8 o'clock in the morning. And so if 3 or 4 of them wanted me at 8 o'clock in the morning, obviously I could only be in one place at one time. I was good enough, though, that some of them would actually wait for me. Others wouldn't, some would. But as time went on, other anesthesiologists realized the wisdom of what I had started. Some worked for me on their days off, others went into the field on their own. In those days, minimal regulations governed office surgery, and most office environments were inadequately outfitted. It was my job to create a safe operating environment for all concerned, especially the patient. I'd walk into some of these offices, they'd want to operate, and it would be a treatment room with a table. And I would then convert that into a safe operating room. I would make sure they had the right monitors. Either they would buy them, I would bring them. I had all my drugs, and I'd make sure they had other things as well. And it was quite a challenge sometimes to do that. Okay. I traveled from office to office and brought whatever I needed, like I said. Every patient had to be properly monitored with a minimum of EKG, blood pressure, and a way to gauge respiration. I also kept oxygen and a crash cart on hand. A crash cart being a case filled with emergency drugs and supplies. I had enough in my bag that I would carry with me. If I was working at offices a lot, I would make them actually buy the crash cart and the oxygen and everything else. Okay, so I'm going to stop there. So, I got more and more popular, and it became a really good business, and I became really busy. And of course, having been in the rock and roll business, I was not impressed by celebrity. And so the doctors realized that I would be a good anesthesiologist for their celebrity patients. And there were many celebrity patients in New York City amongst the different plastic surgeons, as you can imagine. And I didn't get impressed easily, but I'll tell you a funny story. Now, I can't mention names because, again, sensitive topics, and a lot of these people are still alive, and it's just something I can't and I won't do. But early on, I was working for Somers, the original plastic surgeon, and he would call me if we had a special patient. And so the phone rings, and he calls me, and he tells me about this well-known dancer. There was some dance shows on back then in the 80s, and she was a dancer on one of the shows. And she just happened to be somebody that I watched every week. And I had this mad crush on. I freaked out when he told me she was going to be there. I had done all kinds of celebrities and politicians and important people, but somehow this freaked me out. Of course, Leanne saw my reaction with it, and she knew I had this crush because we would watch the show together. And Leanne had been a dancer. And, you're going to do her. At any rate, I tried to keep my cool, had to call her the night before. That was our practice to set up the surgery and stuff. And the next day, I'm sure I was like a bumbling idiot. But as it turned out, we became kind of friendly. And her boyfriend was a famous sports star. And we actually went out to lunch, Leanne and I and her and whatever. And it turned out fine. But it's so funny that I could do anybody and not get freaked out. But when she was, when I heard it was her and I saw her, that was a different story. So you never knew who was going to show up on any given day. And it was pretty stressful because, you don't want to do anything bad to anybody, but certainly not to a celebrity. And so as time went on, I expanded my business beyond cosmetic surgery. Fertility, in vitro fertilization, started up in the late 80s, and I heard about it, and I thought that this would be a great place for me. These guys are going to have to build operating rooms whether they knew it or not. And so I joined the New York Fertility Society, had a bunch of cards, went to the first meeting. No one knew who I was or why I was there. Within a short time, I had a huge fertility practice. And one of my fertility clients was somebody named Niels Lauerson, who you'll hear a lot about later on. But I'm not going to talk about him now. I got in a lot of trouble with Niels Lauerson, but he was this crazy bon vivant kind of a guy. He was Danish, had been hooked up at Mount Sinai, had gone out with Rebecca Harkness, very famous Harkness Ballet, rich people, and was written about in a book about her. At any rate, I built him an operating room, and I expanded. I had cosmetic surgery, and I had fertility. And one day, I'm doing work in his office, and we did all kinds of laparoscopies. He was also a specialist in endometriosis, and we would do laparoscopies in the office too. I built a real operating room, recovery room, whole deal, anesthesia machine. I mean, it was like a little OR upstairs, and then downstairs was his office where he saw patients. And one day he says to me, I have a new girlfriend I want you to meet. She's into music. I said, okay. And so we go out to dinner, Leanne and I, and her name is Denise Rich. And she's a songwriter. And she just had moved from Switzerland with her kids. And as the story goes, she was the wife of somebody, the estranged wife at that point, named Mark Rich. And Mark Rich at the time was probably the biggest white-collar criminal in the United States. And you may remember his name because Bill Clinton pardoned Mark Rich, I think on the last day of his presidency, causing all kinds of controversy, which we still hear about today. At any rate, Mark was a fugitive. When Mark and his partner found out they were going to get arrested, they took off and got immunity kind of in Israel. They were not allowed to be touched in Israel. They set up a whole operation. Not in Israel, I'm sorry, in Switzerland. They were allowed to go to Israel because they gave a lot of money to Israel. But they set up their operation in Zug, Switzerland, and that's where he was. She was kind of a prisoner there. She moved to the States, wanted to be in the music business. And she had a ton of money. And nobody knew who she was. She had actually written a song. She was so bored living in Switzerland, thought she was a songwriter, wrote a song, knew some people, got the song around, and Sister Sledge actually recorded the song. It's called Frankie, and it was a #1 song. She was co-writer. She didn't write it alone, I don't think. At any rate, comes to New York, and nobody knows her, and Denise and I meet. We actually go to the Biosphere in Tucson, Arizona. It was in the early 90s before they closed it up. And that's in the book, and I'll talk about it later. But I want to introduce this now because this is the time when I meet Denise, and I'm dying to get back into the music business. And here she is. Now, she has a manager, but it doesn't seem like he's doing much for her. On this weekend we spend in Arizona, we talk about it, and she says, well, I have this manager, but, maybe you and he could work together. So at some point I'll introduce you and we'll see. And then time goes on, we go back to New York, and I'm not going to tell you the full story here, but I'll just start this one. And I'm working at Lauerson's office. We're doing a case late in the afternoon. It's about 5 o'clock in the afternoon. As we're finishing up the case, about 6 o'clock, he says, what are you doing tonight? I said, what am I doing tonight? Nothing. I'm going home. I'm tired. I've been working all day in the OR. He says, well, why don't you and Leanne come with Denise and I to the Grammys? I said, the Grammys? He said, yeah, I got 2 extra tickets there at Radio City. Come with us to the Grammys. And so We went to the Grammys. I met Denise's manager, who also went with us, a guy named Stewie Wax. And I'll tell you more about it as we go on. But I just want to introduce that to you because eventually I become her co-manager with Stewie, set up a company called The Dream Factory. This is in the early 90s. And I'll go into more detail on that later, but I wanted to bring that up now. All right, let me finish this chapter. So, somewhat later, okay, so I'm doing office anesthesia, but the drugs, the monitors are bad, and it's difficult and it's somewhat dangerous. And then something great happened. Somewhat later, the invention of a small, portable, non-invasive machine called a pulse oximeter proved revolutionary. It measured the blood oxygen saturation level from heartbeat to heartbeat. And if you've ever had any surgery in the last 10, 15 years, you've had it on your finger. Doctor's office, they'll put it on your finger to see your oxygen saturation. With COVID, they've been talking about it a lot, oxygen saturation. I think even now, an Apple Watch can give you oxygen saturation like a pulse oximeter. Very important machine. Not having to estimate this through the combination of a stethoscope on the chest and a visual inspection of the blood in the surgical field cut my stress level in half. More importantly, it made surgery in general, and anesthesia in particular, safer, whether done in an office or a hospital. By 1995, I was settled in my career with a busy, successful practice in office anesthesia. My marriage was good, and Leanne and I were enjoying all the benefits of my being a successful doctor in New York City. And then, a phone call changed my life. All right, that's where I'm going to start. And we'll see what that is next time. And I'll tell more stories about Denise Rich and the Dream Factory and who were some of the people that we dealt with and that kind of stuff. But, I couldn't stay out of the music business for that long. All right, that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed it. Please join me again next week for another episode of Neil Ratner Rock Doc's Reading Room. And always remember, keep on rocking. Bye now.